So when I think of, you're talking about um, understanding and having agreements. An agreement is two-way, right?
Right.
So do we do draw fours and plus twos? Do we play free parking? Do we
Right.
go around, right? And think about, in a coaching, we have expectations and boundaries that we have, but then also what are the expectations of the client, right? And
Mhm.
what if their expectation is I'm coming to you for you to help me solve a problem. So if you could just give me the answer on how to deal with this employee who just is not doing things right, that's what I need. I ask
Right.
me these questions, that's a lot of work. I just want to know how to do it,
Yeah.
right? And if you don't, what happens if you don't flesh that out before you start getting into the sessions, right? It
Right.
can really create a misconnection. And people very often will feel like, what are we doing? And is it of any value? Right. And so
Yes.
that's one of the things that I've seen where a lot of folks say, I just, how do I do this? Can you just tell me how to do this? And, really that's not coaching. Like you mentioned, that's mentorship, right? That's a different place. And that's a different conversation. So, so have you seen that or what else have you seen where maybe your expectations as a coach has been misaligned with the expectations of the client?
I haven't seen it yet, but part of the reason I haven't seen it yet is my very, very first meeting. I don't charge for the very first meeting.
Hmm.
I always, with a new coaching client, do a meet and greet to talk to them about like what are they looking for and is coaching right for them. So I spend probably a good half hour or so with people telling them what coaching is, what it isn't, what they can expect from me, what their sessions will look like, how they can prepare for sessions. Um, I ask them about like what resources are they looking for, or how do they want me to share resources, or um, I ask them all kinds of questions. So I try to be really clear up front. And I actually have had conversations with people where we've decided that coaching is not what they were looking for. And that's okay, right? That's okay. But I try to be really clear up front of what I am going to do and what they're going to need to do. And if that's what they're interested in. Because again, coaching, if for people who are not like the coaching world and don't know the lingo, is like this ambiguous thing. Like what really is coaching? Like you think of like a sports coach, you're going to teach me how to do something and help me develop a strategy and whatever it is. But the type of coaching we do, it's very different, and it's about empowering you to figure yourself out, not for me to figure out what you need to do.
Right.
And so I really, really try to be super transparent in the beginning. um, I haven't come across a client yet that has expressed to me that they're not sure what coaching is once they're in it. Um, Although sometimes it takes a few sessions for them to get a bit more comfortable with the whole inquiry and being vulnerable, that sort of thing can take some time. But um, I try to pay attention too to again, even in that discovery session, like their interest level. I pay attention to like their body language and the questions that they ask, because I might be able to say, I don't maybe think coaching is what you're looking for, or I might not be the right fit for you.
Yeah.
So I had one consultation, with like keeping the confidentiality of it all. But I had one consultation that I could tell right away that this person wasn't interested. And it wasn't because they sought me out, it was because their mom wanted them to go to coaching. And so when I talked to this individual, I found out I really just sensed that they weren't interested in being coached. They were just doing it because their mom was making them. And so I just offered some information and then just left the door. Well, think about if this is something that you're interested in. And if you are, like, let me know, but I won't bother you again. And I never heard back from him. So I could just tell that that was, and that's the thing with coaching. Someone can't want it for you. You have to be open to it. It's not something you do because someone tells you you need it. It has to be something that you're open to. And that's again in that maintaining and establishing agreements. I want to make sure people are getting their money's worth. And coaching is what they want and not something else. Because I don't want to waste their time. I definitely don't want to waste my time because I'm late for something. I'm late for something. I got somewhere else I'm supposed to be. So I want to make sure that it's time well spent.
The white rabbit. I'm late for a
Yeah.
very important date. Yeah.
Yeah. But I really do. I think that's like one of my most important takeaways from being a coach is that you're not a good fit for everybody. And that's okay. And I know a lot of other coaches where if maybe I'm not a good fit for this person or it's not what they're looking for, I can get them connected with somebody else that might be a better fit for what they're looking for.
Yeah. Or a therapist
Or a
or right,
therapist. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
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 Yeah, absolutely. Or somebody
Or
who can be a mentor. Sure.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And that's again one of the reasons I ask people about resources. Like I have a lot of like books and videos and articles that have been meaningful for me or have given me insight on certain things. But guess what? Not everybody's a reader. Not everybody likes TED Talks. Not
Yeah.
everybody wants to read articles. And so um, before I even offer a suggestion, I try to ask people, are you interested or would you be interested in any resources if an idea comes up? And they'll tell me yes or no. And I honor that. If they say, no, I'm not really interested in resources, cool. I'll keep them to myself. But usually, if someone says I am interested, if there's anything you can recommend, um, I will send them an email after the session saying here's the information that you were interested in. And then I don't follow up. I never ask like what'd you think about that article I sent you. If they bring it up, we'll talk about it. But I never follow up on resources because my
Mm.
job is not to talk to you about resources. It's to help you figure things out. So
Yeah. And just so we've had this conversation, a couple times in terms of what to expect from coaching, right? And so let's, like you said, you had, most people have said, yeah, I'm good. Let's go. Let's get the ball rolling. And then, so in terms of setting and maintaining agreements within a session, right? You see, we have that the competency that we talked about, establishes and maintain agreements. So, specifically, how do you establish and maintain agreements within a session? What are some things that you do, Tiff?
so we have like a structure. Um, and again, people coach differently. This is not like the end all be all of coaching, but the way that we were trained and the way that has worked well for me is again, we're client centered and more flexible. But usually we start with a topic like, what do you want to talk about today? And then we move into outcome where we are asking like, what are you hoping? What do you want at the end of this? And then we go into some exploration and really like thinking about again how are they thinking about the topic, how do they feel about it, how does it connect to their values and who they are. um, and then we explore again. We might look at benefits, we might look at drawbacks. There's a lot of again, every conversation is different. There's no formula for exploration per se, but we're looking at like what are they talking about and how does it affect them as a person. But we also have a step where we check in because I'm sure you've experienced in your conversations where we start talking about one thing, but then the conversation spirals and now we're on a completely different topic. I mean, it's connected, but it moves in a different direction. And so part of like that maintaining agreement is we check in and we say, when we started today, you had said your goal was to figure out how to have that conversation with your employee, and you were trying to figure out how to bring up this subject. But we've been spending a lot of time talking about how annoyed you are with your teenage son. So, what direction do we want to keep talking about the teenager, or do we want to go back to the employee? And then we let them decide like which way to go. And so sometimes they're like, well, actually, it's the same topic because what I'm really struggling with is how to have hard conversations with people. And so we can find that connective tissue Or they may say, you know what, actually, let's deal with the teenager and I'll worry about the employee and later. Like this is actually the most pressing thing for me. And so we will go in that direction. And so for the last part of this is like a closing. And one of the things with coaching is that the coach is not responsible for any behavior change. It's 100% up to the client, like what they decide to do. So, as a coach, I'm going to not going to say, well, your homework is to, go on TikTok and search for parenting videos. Like, right. I'm not going to tell you to do that, but I'm going to ask my client, what's your plan what are you going to do with this information? Or what is your next step? Or what are you taking away from today that's going to be useful for you? And having them think about their conversation, not me telling them what was important about their conversation. And so, again, part of the agreement that I have with my clients is that I'm not going to tell you what to do and I'm not going to judge. We'll listen, but we won't judge. We listen and we don't judge, is to really help you think about what your next step is. And again, whatever it is, you can do it or not do it. It doesn't impact me. I'm not connected to it. And so part of my coaching agreement, by the way, going again back to how we set the foundation, is I usually ask people, do you want me to follow up on our last session, or would you rather everyone start fresh? And almost every person says, I would just like to start fresh every time. And if that's what they say, I honor that. If they ask me, can you just follow up on what I was going to do? Just ask me a question about it, then I will. Like, hey, I know when we met last time, you said you were going to talk to the kid. How'd that go? Right. So I keep those agreements. Everybody's different, but it's not up to me to do the behavior. And I make sure that they know that like right away. Like as your coach, your success or your failure belongs to you. And I just want you to know I'm going to support you through this process. But what you do or don't do is 100% up to you. And I'm not going to judge you either way. And I keep that agreement. I keep that agreement.
Cool. And what you were talking about,
Mhm.
just for everyone, the process that Tiff was talking about is what's called the rule of four,
Yeah.
right? And
Thank you for being technical with it. Yes, it is the rule of four.
well, I just,
It is. It's important.
this can
Yeah.
be a resource,
Yes.
right? If
Yes.
you Google the rule of four, that will pop up, right? So, and you'll find that everything that's in the rule of four is what Tiff just walked you through, right? So,
Yeah.
and it really is important. It's something that we are trained and drilled on,
Mm-hmm.
um, and to do it well means as you continue in your coaching journey, that it just becomes integrated in your process where you're not intentionally thinking about, am I
Right.
following the rule of four? Right. So,
Right.
but just identifying, the topic that people want to talk about, that's what they want to talk about, right? Like you mentioned, right? So, what is it that you want to talk about? Hey, so what's going on today? How are you feeling? What's on your mind? Right.
Yep.
Those different questions. Well, I want to talk about this. Okay. And, you know, sometimes it'll be very pointed where I just want to talk about how I'm able to get this done. Okay. So what would you like to have happen by the end of this session? Right. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's the outcome. Right. Sometimes the topic may be, some people might like to really have a discussion. Yeah, my son or my spouse, and they're doing this and they're doing that. And so, we came across this, and let me tell you a story. And that might take a while. But even in fleshing out the topic, some people are a little more, deductive with their thinking, where they're have a wide range of things that they're going through, which usually might lead to a specific piece, right? And so, okay, so you're, so what would you like to see happen as a result of our conversation today, right? And so that's the outcome. And then
Yeah.
we explore through asking those questions based off the topic, right? So that definitely is something where we are really, even though we're following a intentional process,
Mm-hmm.
we are really being reactive to what that person's saying or doing, right?
Right.
I know I mentioned maybe in the last episode that one of the issues that I am very conscious of is that when I hear topic. I have a solution in my head and I want to lead the client to the solution.
Hmm.
And what I recognize is my solution may not work for that other person. And so I need to be intentional of my thought processes in saying, okay, am I being responsive to what the client's saying? Right. Which is why we get to that point, like you mentioned, where having the check-in, they may start out with, I want, my blood pressure's, up and I can't sleep. And then they start talking about their exercise regimen. And right. And maybe, a half an hour in, if it's an hour long session, 15 minutes into a half an hour session. Okay. So just want to make sure we're still on the same page, right? I mean, we started with you talking about wanting to reduce your blood pressure, and we've spent, a little bit of time talking about your exercise regimen. Are we in the same place, or how do those connect? Right. And
Right.
so having that type of conversation with them to make sure, because Tiff and I have both said, our personalities are more emergent. If you let me go off on a tangent, we will stay in that rabbit hole and we will never come out. And then what I really wanted to talk about in that session does not get talked about. And so guess what? I come back the next session, still having the same issue, right? And still having the same
Right.
question when we could have maybe moved forward. And that's the nuance of coaching, right? It's why folks are trained in, okay, we are listening, we're being responsive, we are asking questions based off of what the client is saying, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we are still servicing the needs of that client. And very
Right.
often, what the topic is just the surface level of what's below, right? And
Right.
so the check-in might be, hey, so you started talking about your blood pressure, and now you're talking about your exercise regimen. Well, actually, that's the issue. I'm trying to think about how I can make an exercise regimen because I know that my blood pressure will get better, my blood sugar will get better. Okay, so maybe that initial topic is leading to something that's larger,
Right.
but that is not my realization. That is the realization of the client. All right. So the client might say, yeah, I've been thinking about this exercise regimen for a long time, but I really do want to talk about my blood pressure because there's other things other than my exercise regimen. Okay, cool. So we
Right.
are back focused, but that has nothing to do with us. Like I keep saying, it's not about me.
Hmm.
It's not
Yeah.
about me. It's not about the coach. It's about the client. How do we make sure that the client is best served? Right. And if that means in the check-in, we are coming back to see how you're feeling. That
Hmm.
works. And then in the wrap up, like you mentioned, how do we make those wrap up feelings, the conversations really client focused, right? And that is something where, okay, so, you've decided you wanted to, your exercise regimen is going to be a half an hour in the gym 3 times a week, and then 3 times a week, you're going to walk around the block. Is that what I heard? So, you know, when are you going to start? Right. So
Hmm.
just creating that environment of not just setting the goal, but confirming a plan. Right. And
Right.
so a wrap up really is about identifying the plan and the process that's going to go into it. Right. So, just like we talked about goals a few episodes ago, goals have to be specific. So your plan has to be specific. So when are you going to start? Where are you going to go? What are some things that are going to help you to realize this, right? What are some concerns that you have? Well, I don't know if I can afford it. Okay, so what are some, how much work have you looked in terms of, affordable places? Well, the one right next to my house is 140 bucks a month. I don't know if I want to spend all that. Okay, well, where else have you looked? Well, I don't know. 24-hour fitness sometimes has those deals. Maybe I'll go there. There's one not too far away from my house, right? Okay, so, just to do that exploration, and where else would you look, right? And so just to be able to have that idea of somebody creating an action plan to look for different things and to make a commitment to themselves. The other thing is, how are you going to hold yourself accountable? Right. So
Yeah.
that's all part of that wrap up. Right. So, who's going to help you? Right. Who's going to facilitate you doing these things? Right. And if it's just you, well, then that takes, a little, okay, so what are you going to do for yourself to make sure that this works? But if you have a partner, well, my spouse is down, or we just started an exercise regimen with my mom. She needs to, the doctor recommends she get in the exercise. She has congestive heart failure. And so he said exercise will help. So we've developed a plan where we are going a couple times a week when I'm in town. And like you meant, like we both mentioned, I'm much more accountable to other people. So when my mom's saying I'm headed to the gym, guess what? I'm getting up to go to the gym. Right. So,
Right.
so just having that idea of where are the places that you've looked, what are the things that you like to do? I'm kind of coaching my mom. Okay, so we've done these different exercises. What do you think works for you? What is it that you're really trying to do? Well, I just really want to build up my stamina in my legs. Okay, so so what is it that you want to focus on? Well, probably leg exercises more the than than arm and chest and things like that. Okay, great.
Hmm.
So that's what you want to focus on. Great. Right. So let's focus on that rather than, well, you need to go through my regimen because this is what I do and this
Right.
is how I do things. I do 100 push-ups a day. And if you don't do that, then you're not doing it correctly. Right. Which is a judgment, which turns people off. Right. My
Yeah.
mom ain't going to do 100 push-ups a day. She's, but she will spend time on the recumbent bike. She will spend time on the leg press and the leg lift and the hamstrings, right? And those things like that that are facilitating where she would like to get, right?
Right.
And so my plan is not her plan. And I'm perfectly fine with that, right? And while she's working on her plan, I work on my stuff,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And it's not, well, you're doing it wrong, right? And which is a challenge for some people. And so having that wrap up session really helps that person to solidify a plan that works for them, that they are willing to carry out and to stay motivated. And that includes who are you going to lean on, right?
Yeah.
And then at the end of the end of the wrap up, how are you feeling? Like you mentioned, what are some things that you've learned? How would you like to end this session, right? Really, where they are solidifying what it is that we discussed, and that what we discussed is what they wanted to discuss. And so,
Hmm.
you're you talking about the rule of four, just putting that into practice. It's really it's a powerful way to help coaches to stay on task, right? And like I said, the more that you use it, it's a muscle. The more that you use it, then, the better you are with it, and the more it becomes natural into your style, right?
Well, one of the reasons I like that structure is because it allows you to have good conversations without like the ramble. Because sometimes what happens is like you get someone talking about the problem and all they want to do is vent about the problem, which I'm not going to say that there's not some value sometimes in venting about an issue. But again, if our goal is to help people transform, if it's to engage people in problem solving, if we don't have like a structure where it's just like I'm just venting to you, then we're really not facilitating change, which is part of the agreement. Part of our agreement we make as a coach is like, I'm going to help you like explore and figure out solutions. You figure out, partner with you to figure out your solutions, but to move you towards again something that you're looking forward to. Um, One of the agreements too that we keep is that we use the client's language, like we use their terms, we explore their terms and really keep it again focused on what the client is. And so I just was thinking when we were talking about the closing, one of like the coachy the coachy questions that we learned or at least that I saw that was used quite often is like, what do you hear yourself say? And what I have discovered, I just thought this was a little fun fact, is that with other coaches, that's a really great question. But anybody who's not in like the coaching realm, when I ask them, what do you hear yourself say? It throws them off. So they're like, what are you asking me? So I've had to like learn how to rephrase that kind of question, because I just laugh that anybody that's not a coach, when I ask them, what do you hear yourself say? I get a look of, I don't know what you're asking me right now. So I will ask something like, what are you discovering about yourself? And, we've been talking for a while, like, what direction do you feel you're heading in, or whatever the question is. It's hard to come up with on the spot when you're not doing it, but
Yeah.
um it's really, again, quite an interesting dynamic from a coach's perspective. Now, thinking like coach approach, because we're not just like appealing to fellow coaches, but just thinking about this from a leadership perspective. As a coach, when you have a client, it's real easy to say, well, what do you want to talk about? Where do you want to go? What outcome do you want? But from a leadership perspective, especially if you're using the coach approach and like giving feedback or looking to change behavior, you may not have that sort of flexibility in the sense of asking your staff, well, what do you want to talk about today? If there's like something as a leader that you have to bring up, like maybe I need to talk to them about their attendance, or maybe I need to talk about their performance. So, in some ways, you can use that coach approach with giving feedback or with like performance management, but it's not going to have the same structure. But you can still, again, use some of the same concepts and maintain and kind of establish agreements. And so if I have Carl, let's say Carl's my employee, congratulations, you've been hired. There's no pay and absolutely no benefits. But welcome to the team. But if Carl's my employee and I have to talk to him about, let's say, punctuality, then I still have to come in with like some agreements. Like, Carl, I really enjoy having you on my team and you're a great asset. And there's just one thing that really has gotten in the way of us working well together, and that's punctuality. I expect that you be here by 8 a.m. That's what we agreed to. And I've noticed lately that you haven't been meeting the mark. You come in again at 8:10 and 8:23 and 9:12 last week. And I'm just curious, like, what's going on there? Um, and we have a conversation about it. And so I might ask Carl, like, given that 8 o'clock is like a non-negotiable for me as your employer, like, I'm wondering what are some things that you can do to make sure that you can meet that agreement, and then have him do a bit of brainstorming. I don't have to say, hey, Carl, have you tried setting your alarm earlier? Have you tried carpooling? Have you tried public transportation? Have you tried sleeping in your clothes that you're going to wear to work and just waking up? Like, I can offer all of these solutions, but I don't know what's going on in Carl's life. And so this is where I love the coach approach from a leadership perspective, where I can give you direct feedback. Like, this is what you're doing. Like, here's your behavior. This is what time you're coming to work. And I just want to clarify our agreement that we agreed to 8 a.m. You agreed to that, and I agreed to that when I hired you. So now what's our plan to get back into that? Let's come back to that agreement. Or, by the way, sometimes you have to adjust the agreement. I know when I started, I said I could be here at 8 o'clock, but something in my family's changed and I really need to be able to come in at 8:30. Well, if I can accommodate that agreement, like, is that something I can do? And if not, then I can say, well, that's not going to work for me. Let's figure out a different solution. So that is kind of how it translates for me. Too often, I think that in leadership, we set the agreements, but then we don't maintain them until they get out of control. And then it feels like a surprise when all of a sudden I'm like, so Carl, you've been late for the last 2 years and it needs to stop today.
Why are you
Like,
bringing
where
up
was
old
that two
stuff? Why
years
didn't you
ago?
bring it up 2 years ago?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, it hasn't been a problem in the last 2 years. Why all of a sudden? And now it feels personal. And
Yeah.
so this is why, again, when we make these agreements, then we have to honor them. And I think it's important for us to keep on top of that, because uh, I don't know. I watch a lot of Judge Judy. I mean, I did watch a lot of Judge Judy on TikTok before, but you know, there's a difference between a verbal agreement and a written agreement. And so if our written agreement, which again, most employees, coaches, by the way, we do a written agreement. This is part of how we create good, clear expectations, is we have a coaching agreement that everybody signs before we start the coaching relationship. So in that aspect, even if you have it in writing, if it's not enforced, it's not enforced, it's not enforced, then people have a reasonable expectation that it's not really an agreement. And that's why it's important for us to, again, be really clear on what we want from people and what they expect from us, and then hold them to it. I can tell you right away, if in my household, if we don't keep our agreements, we have a real conversation about it before it becomes like a problem. We don't really fight with each other. Every once in a while, we get on each other's nerves, but for the most part, we don't argue, we don't fight, which is like, so, I nailed it. Healthy relationship, nailed it. But part of that is again coming from this aspect of maintaining agreements. I've had challenges like with my adult kids, like my son Oscar, bless you, Oscar, but he would like be argumentative with my other kids, and it would kind of ruin our holiday because they're fighting with each other. And so when the next holiday came up, we would have a conversation like, I really want you to be here, and the agreement is we're civil to each other. We're not fight. We don't fight. uh I have to tell you, just we don't fight. We don't fight with each other. So if you are going to come and be civil and be loving and kind, then I want you here. If you are going to come and start fights, then just stay at your house and don't waste your gas coming to my house. And I know that that sounds harsh. Some of you are probably like, oh my gosh, you're such a horrible mom. Like, no, I want to make sure that we have clear understandings of what we expect from each other. And I want peace on Thanksgiving, a Fakesgiving, because we don't even do real Thanksgiving. I want peace on Fakesgiving. And that's everybody knows that. And if you don't want peace on Thanksgiving or Fakesgiving, go to somebody else's house, but don't do it here. And guess what? Oscar showed up and we had a great holiday. And we had a great holiday because we were clear on the expectations. So, by the way, they have expectations for me too. They're like, Mom, if I'm coming all the way to Thanksgiving, I better have a pumpkin roll to go. And I make them their pumpkin roll to go because that's what they want. We agree to that. And I'm going to meet them there too. So it's not just one sided, it's a partnership. It's a partnership. Why I just was laughing right now about there's no fighting. I don't know if you listen to, I'm sure you do. You listen to all kinds of music, but Shakira has the song Hips Don't Lie, right? And so, part of part of that song is like, no fighting, no fighting. And so I used to tell my kids, there's no fighting on rib night. Oh, because we would make ribs. I would say, you know what Shakira says, no fighting on rib night, no fighting, no fighting. And so that was like one day my kids would get along. It's when we had rib night because they know there's no fighting on rib night.
I
Oh.
I would have been playing when they walked through the door, the Little John song, don't start no stuff, won't be no stuff, right? So,
They
you
do,
know,
I do that
yeah,
freestyle
yeah,
for them. I don't even
yeah.
play the song. I acapella that for them. That's one thing that does come up. But
Yeah.
it's just again, these agreements that we make, and we're all people, we're all going to fail at some point. Again, I'm not saying that we have to be perfect in these agreements because it's really easy to get off track, but we know that you notice it, and like just own it and fix it. And I might even be able to say to a coaching client, the last time that we met, I know our agreement was I wasn't going to give you any advice and tell you what to do. And I know that I got real passionate about this one idea I had. So I just wanted to let you know that I'm sorry for that. And I want to make sure that your ideas are your ideas. And I'm going to
Yeah.
honor that moving forward. So I can acknowledge when I get it wrong and reiterate what that expectation was so we don't get it confused. And if
Yeah.
I can't keep it to myself, then that's a good indicator that we're probably not a good fit. And I should probably get them connected with somebody that can meet their needs better.
Yeah. And just keeping it in the leadership realm and talking about, what does it mean to be on time, right? And
Yeah,
we've had this conversation, but I mean, just
right.
thinking about what was the expectation that was set about being on time, right? And, is on time, for me, the expectation that I create is on time means whenever your shift starts, you're ready to receive phone calls, ready to receive emails, and ready to receive customers who may be waiting for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, whatever time that means you get to your workstation, if it takes 5 minutes to warm up your computer, I'm sorry, they're old systems. I apologize, but then if you can get here at, 5 till and make sure that your computer's on ready to go, then that's what we need to go. If you can do it in 30 seconds, that's great. If you feel like you need to be here 20 minutes ahead of time to socialize and to do all your stuff, with
Hmm.
all your coworkers, get in where you fit in. But the
Hmm.
issue is if you walk through the door right at your start time and you're not ready to see customers, that's not being on time, right? Because it's,
And see, yeah,
that's not us. It's not our sense of time, especially when we're working in helping professions, right? The it really is about being on time for the people who receive our services, right?
you
And
know what?
so,
Yeah, I was to say I feel so differently about what being on time is. And this is not just from somebody who's late. I am like, if you, again, this is my mindset. I'm not saying it's the right way, but it's the way I think about it. If it takes your computer 5 minutes to warm up the company computer you provided me, and you don't have it where it boots up fast, and I got to come 5 minutes early, F FYPM, you better pay me those 5 minutes because I'm technically on the clock. So for me, being on time is you've arrived and you're at your workstation. And if it takes 5 minutes for your computer to boot up, and that's a problem for me as the employer, but I'm not going to make my employees work for free. But that's, we have different ideas around time. And I'm not going to say yours is wrong, but that's where we
so
have to have discussions around that.
well, so see there, then that's a perfect example, right?
Right.
So if it takes 5 minutes for the computer to warm up, but you can still answer phone calls or see
Right.
people
Right. Right.
when your shift starts, and you're like, well, I got here right when my shift starts and it takes 5 minutes to warm up, even though there's somebody waiting out in the lobby. That's where we have to come to an understanding of what
Right.
it means to be
Right.
on time, right? And so
Right.
that is a level of specificity and understanding agreements,
Right.
right? That really need to be established, because how many people would say, I was here, I walked through the door. I walked through the door at 9 o'clock. Or I saw you in the break room at 9:05. Well, I have to put away my lunch,
Mm-hmm.
right? Okay, well, if you bring yourself a lunch, is that my time that you do to put
Right.
away your lunch, or is it your time? Because maybe I don't bring a lunch. Maybe I DoorDash. Maybe I go next door to Jack in the Box, where I don't have to spend that 5 minutes walking down the hallway to put stuff in the fridge.
Right. No,
And
it's an important conversation to have.
so
Yeah.
that's an important conversation to have, right? If I have somebody in the lobby at 8:30 when you're supposed to be here and be ready at 8:30, when their next trip is a 9:15 appointment at the WIC office, which is 2 miles away, and they have to walk there, and you're putting your lunch away, or talking with your coworker, where is the level of care,
Right.
right?
Right.
That's the issue. So in thinking about being a leader, being specific on what the expectation is. Now, if it's not a specific expectation and it's something that you can build with your coworker, I mean, so, I've had places where I've been able to work flexible times, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what time works for you? Generally people come in at 8 o'clock. Does that work for you? Well, actually, I work a second job, or I got to drop my kids off. So really, I can't, I'd rather be there at 9. Okay. So rather than working 8 to 4 or 8 to 4:30, you work 9 to 5:30. Was that something that'll work for you? Yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That'll work. Okay, great. Now we've created a mutual understanding of what's important. So when that person who's here at 8 o'clock says, how come she gets to come in at 9 o'clock? That is the understanding that we have, because we do not have set schedules, right? If
Right.
do you need to come in at 9 o'clock? And if you do, and we have certain situations where people have to be there has to be a certain amount of people there at a certain time. Well, now we have to start getting into negotiations and compromise, to accommodate our staffing needs as opposed to the needs of the individual. But if there isn't necessarily that um, hard, stringent need, how do we help empower our staff to be able to make those decisions, right? And so to have that conversation, what works for you? If something can work for you, what works
Yeah.
for you, right? When I worked for the county, our office closed at 5 o'clock. There was no overtime, and our boss always used to come by. at 4:58 and say, we're not getting paid any extra and I have to close up this office based off of an agreement. So we all had to leave right at 5 o'clock, right? So we knew when our schedules. Now, I had, I also wanted to coach. I coached baseball. And in the spring, I would ask my boss, hey, instead of coming in at 7:30, can I come in at 7 and leave at 4:30 so that I can make practice by 5? So there was flexibility on the front end,
Yeah.
right? But if we don't have that relationship with our staff, sometimes they feel like there is no negotiating and it's really all up to you. I have no choice. And when people feel like they have no choice, very often they'll defer to you and they won't feel as engaged. They won't feel like this is something that's important to me. Right. And so, and then pointing out things like attendance or performance, right? I go back to that, my old model that we talked about months ago, right? CBIA, right? CBIA plus F, right? And so bringing up those ideas, right? The C stands for context, right? The B is for behavior, the I is for impact, the A is for action, the F is for feedback. And so the context is, hey, look, this last week, your shift, we identified your shift starting at 9 o'clock. You were here on Monday at 9:02. You were here Wednesday at 9:11. You were here Thursday at 9:09. Just wanted to talk to you about that and see if there's anything's changed or what's going on, how
Mhm.
I can help you, you know, um, because our agreement is 9 o'clock, right?
Right.
So it's not 2 years ago we talked about this, don't you remember? Right. And
Right.
so, a real important thing about expectations is that it has to be something that's enforceable. It has to be something that's communicated regularly, and it has to be something that's agreed to by the client, by the customer, and by the coworker, if the worker. If somebody has
Yes.
not, you cannot hold somebody accountable to an expectation that they haven't already agreed to. And if you have an idea, well, they should know this, and you haven't connected to them, that is not their fault. And that is something that very often HR will come back and say, well, when's the last time you had this conversation with them?
Mhm.
When's the last time you documented these issues? And if you're not enforcing them and following up on them, then you can call that person a bad employee all you want, but sometimes it's important to look in the mirror and say, what have I done to hold this person accountable to our agreements, to help them be accountable to our agreements? And
Right.
so it's not always about the other person.
No,
Sometimes it's
absolutely
about
not.
what have I done, right?
Well, not only that, I appreciate the what did the employee agree to, because what I'm seeing, and I'm sure that other people have experienced this as well, is that employers like may hire you for a certain job for a certain level of productivity, and of course, as people get laid off or the economy changes or the workload changes, people are expected to do more and more and more and more with the same amount of money or the same amount of responsibility or whatever that looks like. And so that creates a divide too between the employer and the employee, because I took this job with this expectation and now you keep changing the rules, and now I'm doing the work of three different people, and then I ask you, I'm doing the work of three people, like, pay me. And they're like, we don't have money in the budget. But then I say, okay, then I'm going to leave. And they hire somebody for, twice what they were paying you. And then they wonder why they can't get anybody to stay with them long term or have any kind of loyalty to the company when the company continues to exploit people. So, this is where, as much as we want the employees to keep their agreements, right? And we decide what that agreement is and we help them meet those expectations, but as an employer, you too have to look at, am I keeping my end of the bargain? Right? If I tell you, you know what, Carl, congratulations, welcome to my company, you get unlimited PTO. And then you try to take that PTO, and I'm like, no, you can't have that pay time off. Well, you lied to me then because you told me this, and now you're trying to do something else. My trust for you is out the window. And my performance is probably going to suffer because you're not keeping your word to me, but you want me to keep my word to you. Like, let's see who wins this stalemate, right? let's
Right.
let's see who can last longer on this. Because I can tell you one thing, in my day, back before I was the reformed professional that I am now, um, I could absolutely be a waste of payroll for a long period of time just to prove a point. just to prove a point. The good news is I'm reformed now and I wouldn't do that now. But what I am saying is that, people keep score of how you keep your agreements. And so it's like if you as an employer, if you as my leader are real big about keeping me accountable, but if I bring something up, then it goes unnoticed, whether I know it or not, my brain is keeping score. And you're gonna lose credibility if you don't keep your agreements as well.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be less likely to meet mine because we've already established that this is not a trusting relationship. So why do I say again? The same goes with marriages, friendships. If we start to see this shit's one-sided, I'm doing all the work, then I may not continue that relationship. And what's really interesting to me is when the people who are not keeping their agreements feel blindsided, like I don't know where this came from. Like my first marriage, I not to bring up all again, this is where I trauma dump, but when um when I was getting a divorce from my first husband, I had been asking him for years, like we should go to counseling because we're just not communicating well with each other. Like maybe we need to get a third party to help us talk to each other. And because I'm a very like I'll tell you what I want. Like I don't want it to be a secret because I like to get what I want and I just don't want to assume that you know what I want. So I'll tell you like this is important to me. I need you to do this. And so I was very vocal for years. This is what I need. This is what I want. This is what I need to be happy. And nothing would change. So when I finally like said I'm leaving, like I'm not doing this anymore and I'm going to go, um he was like, "Well, let's go to counseling." And I'm like, "Okay, let's go." Right? Like I've been asking for this for years. Maybe we'll make a breakthrough. And I remember like I had already made the decision that I was leaving, but I thought I'm going to go to this counseling and see what happens. And I remember leaving that first meeting in such a rage. I never went back because all of the things that I had been saying for years, like, this is what I need, this is what I want. When we were in front of the counselors, like, yeah, I can do that. I can do that. And I'm like, no, it's too late. Right? Because how all of a sudden do you hear me? How all of a sudden do you hear me? And I've been like shouting this for years. And now all of a sudden, because someone's looking at you, putting the pressure on you, now you hear me. Like, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I was so infuriated. And again, we had not maintained agreements for years with each other. And I'm gonna say with each other, I'm not a victim here. I wasn't always a great wife either. But um it was like too little too late. And this happens again. It happens in coaching relationships, it happens in leadership relationships, and even with us with the our clients in human services. There's a reason we don't have a good reputation. We say we'll maintain your confidentiality, but then we vent about you to all our coworkers. I mean, that doesn't happen in real life, in an imaginary world. Like,
And and not everyone's perfect. You
no,
can't
not at all.
not everyone's not going to live up to your expectations all the time. Sometimes people are going to
Right.
fail. Sometimes people have the best intentions. I have the best intentions of being on time every time that I show up at a place, and for the most part, I am. I have the best intentions of not double booking poor Olga. I'm really sorry about that, right? Sometimes I'm going to screw up, but the more that we establish those expectations and understand where things are important, then there are benefits to that, right? It holds
Right.
people accountable. If you see someone not living up to an expectation and you nip it in the bud, that helps them to stay on top of things because
Right.
you may think the most important thing in the world to them is what you need them to do, when maybe to them, the most important thing in the world are two or three other things that come first. And you're going to take it personally if they don't live up to your expectations because they're taking care of other things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So things come up in people's lives, you know, people get shorted on checks, they don't make as much money, other things, have people die, right? And
Mm-hmm.
kids have hard times at school, and that may not be something that
Right.
people think, oh, my boss don't want to hear about that, right? But that's what happens. And so when we are holding people to expectations, we have better communication because we are checking in on, are we meeting the mutual expectations we have for each other? And it's not just, are you honoring what we expect from you? Am I honoring what you
Right.
expect from me, right? So
Right.
that helps to create that trusting communication. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about trust in the next session, I know.
Mhm.
But but also the benefits, performance management. If you have a level of expectations people need to meet, how easy is it to check in to see if they're meeting those
Mhm.
expectations on a regular basis, rather than at the end of the year when somebody thinks that they've been a rock star and really they've been performing
Blech.
karaoke, right? So
I saw you were
you
testing me right now to see if I would get triggered.
you threw up all over my punchline.
Sorry, go
I
ahead.
said someone thought they were being a rock star and they're actually performing karaoke, right? So,
That's right.
but that's a pop quiz. That's a
Right.
pop quiz when people, oh, I thought I was doing everything right. No one said anything to me.
Right.
Well,
Right.
the expectations. We talked about them last year when you signed the policies and procedures, right? Expectations have to be regularly communicated. We have to check in with folks. People have lives outside of what it is that you expect them to do, right?
Right.
And so that is definitely an important piece, right? It helps to be able to maintain performance management. It's not so hard.
Right.
It's not so difficult. It's not so I need to remember these things. No, people will remember them for themselves. I always tell people in performance management, the greatest thing is if you can get your staff to own their own performance management. They know what to
Right.
expect and they are documenting how they are keeping track of those expectations. That makes it so easy for you to review what they've sent you and to cut and paste and put it into their evaluation so that you can give them a fair interpretation along with the other 10 folks that you manage. Right.
Right.
And then that improves engagement. When I know what to expect, I look forward to coming to work,
Mm-hmm.
right? I know what my leader is going to provide me. I know what my staff is going to provide me. My my favorite boss, and I would say my best boss was not somebody who was super rah rah, cheerful, super empathetic, and emoting, expressions, but was very consistent and very understanding and thoughtful and empathetic in her own way. It just wasn't something where she was going to say, I love you guys so much. It was really, I'm
Right.
here for you. I understand what's going on. Talk to me about what's going on so I can help in the way that I can as your leader. Right. And so every day I knew what to expect. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew, what she expected from me. And when I came in to talk to her, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
afraid of what she was going to say because I wasn't sure how she was going to say it. I might ask her for some time off. I might ask her for, something that happened. But I also recognize that if I'm asking, that she knows the only reason I'm asking for these things that are out of the ordinary is because she knows me.
Right.
And the more that we have those conversations with each other, that they're not, if I'm asking for something out of the ordinary, it really is something that's important, right? As
Right.
opposed to, oh, well, you're just like the other people. You're just asking for stuff willy nilly. If that's how you feel about your staff, that people are just asking for things together, then take a look at how much you've really taken the time to understand each staff member as an individual person who has
Mm-hmm.
individual lives, individual relationships, individual life goals, and family goals. That's
Right.
such an important. You asked me what superpower, and I came up with with the boxing thing and then organizing. For me, my number one strength and strengths finders is individualization, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to look at people as individuals. Everyone has a single story,
Mm-hmm.
which means I don't lump people into these people. You don't hear, in general, these people this, these people that. Um,
Yeah.
even when it comes to personality theory, D's and I's and S's and C's, right? So in general, these are things that are common to D's or I's, but D's or I's are also people who grew up with individual family members and individual values and individual morals. And so they don't always go according to Hoyle, right?
Right.
So recognizing people as individuals that have things going on rather than lumping them in with everyone else. What's wrong with these people? What's happening with this person?
Mm-hmm.
And how can I identify how I can best support this person? So, as a leader, intentionally thinking about the other person, which we've already talked about, is difficult because we want to go to how am I feeling about this situation as opposed to this person's going through the situation. How are they feeling about it? Because really, that's the important thing. right?
Well,
So
yeah.
there are real benefits to, you know, having these types of conversations and setting these expectations. It's not just about these are the rules and this is what you have to follow. The more that we establish our understandings of how we're going to work together, the more we get to know each other and the more we are more empathetic and closer as a unit. We don't all have to be friends. We just have to know how to support each other. And the more that you support your staff, they'll stay longer and they'll be more productive.
Yep. Yep. And they won't waste your payroll.
And they won't waste your time, right? So,
They won't waste your time.
yeah. Well, so Tiff, so how are we what have you heard yourself say today about expectations and agreements?
Well, this is the time for, I thought about this when I was trying to sleep last night. Tips, riffs, and hot tips.
Here we go.
So here's what I hear. Number one, I think it's important in all relationships, whether it be a coaching relationship, a leadership relationship, or even your personal relationships, to be really clear on what you expect from people and what they can expect from you. And so I think it's a great time to, even before you have those conversations, to do some self-reflection, and really think about, again, those relationships. What are you offering, and what do you want from them, and how do you find that balance, because it has to be mutual. um the second thing that comes to mind here is um really maintaining the agreements, and taking some like periodic review of that agreement, whatever it is, and making sure that you are meeting what you promised, and also, again, having a conversation if somebody else is missing the mark. So um, the best way to do that, of course, is through a non-blameful conversation. It's not about blame or shame, but just saying, this is what we agreed to, and here's what I'm noticing. Like, where do we go from here? It's not about punishment. It's really about accountability, and that includes being accountable to your part as well. Um, the third thing I would say, and this one's really a good self-reflection question, um, is like, what areas of your life could benefit from creating better agreements? Like the example I think about, my kids are adults, and as they started to venture out of the house and find housing on their own, anytime that they were going to get involved in like a roommate type setting, I would tell them, this was where I was giving advice. I wasn't coaching here, but I would tell them, right now, while everything is good and everybody's getting along, before you move in together, have a discussion about how you all want to split household chores. Have a conversation about how you want to do food and snacks and utilities and cleanliness, and your expectations around like how tidy or untidy the house can get. Like, talk about these things. If someone doesn't have their rent, like, what's the plan? Like, anything that you can think of that could go wrong, like, talk about it beforehand while things are good, because I promise you that when things are not good, it's going to be really hard to hash those things out when everybody's frustrated. Did they take my advice? Well, one of them didn't, and that ended unwell. Did not end well for my middle son's first roommate relationship. But I think he's learned some lessons from that. And like, there's no harm in hashing out the, how do you play this? What are the house rules here? There's no harm in having those conversations just around what is expected, because it saves you from the drama of undiscussed expectations with each other. I can't meet you where you're at if you don't tell me, and you can't meet me where I'm at if I don't tell you. And we have to come to that agreement. So I would just say, really do some reflection, like, where maybe some of the conflicts or challenges in your life, whether personal or professional, that could benefit from maybe some clarity around the agreements.
Closed mouths don't get fed.
That's right. They sure don't.
Yeah.
And if you're scared, go to church. No, I'm just joking.
All
No,
right.
but I really do believe that. I try to live very, very transparent, and I'm human like everybody else. I don't always meet the expectations. I don't, but I own it when I don't. I acknowledge it. I don't blame anybody else. I acknowledge it, and then I move on. And because I can be vulnerable like that, I don't have tons of conflict around unmet expectations, because when I can call somebody else on their behavior, they usually can own that too, because they know I'm willing to do the same. It's not a gotcha. It's not a gotcha. It's a like, I want this to work, and this is what we agreed to. How do we get back to that? Or do we need to readjust? Right? Because maybe the agreements we made were unrealistic. So let's look at what how do we want to keep going? Like, this is important to me. Sometimes, by the way, those relationships aren't important to me. We're too far apart. We're too far apart and we're not going to agree. And that's not, it's okay. You just do your thing and I'm going to do my thing. We don't have to have an agreement, but we also don't have to deal with each other. And that's okay too. Not everybody's going to be a great fit. And that's okay. Period. There you go.
Well,
That's my tips, riffs, and hot tips. If you could put some little flames come up on the screen when I do that, that'd be great. If I can make a suggestion.
I will definitely try. I don't know how it's going to work, but I mean, it's got to be
It's
something more than
okay.
that, right? So
More than a rocket. Yeah. I don't
more
know.
than a rocket. All
I'm
right.
just
Well,
joking.
we'll figure that out for sure.
Yeah.
But until that happens, we will see you all next time. And I am Carl,
I am Tiff.
and we are keeping it flaming with the
We're
hot tips, keeping it
like a
real,
hot
real.
tip. Blaming with the hot tips.
All right, well, take care.
All right. You too.